I sat in front of the vanity mirror, surrounded by golden light and the hum of expensive perfume, watching a stranger transform my face into something flawless. The gala was already beginning downstairs. I could hear the muffled orchestral music rising through the marble floors of the plaza, the laughter of people who controlled empires with a handshake. My husband had insisted I look perfect tonight, more perfect than usual, because this wasn't just any event. This was the night he would announce his political endorsement, the night cameras would capture us as the golden couple, untouchable and enviable. I should have felt proud, but instead I felt hollow like a mannequin being dressed for a window display. The makeup artist, a young woman with steady hands and kind eyes, worked in silence, her brushes moving across my skin with the precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times. I watched her in the mirror, noticing the way her jaw tightened every time she glanced toward the door. Something about her energy felt off, like she was carrying a secret too heavy to hold alone. But I had no idea that in just a few moments, she would shatter the fragile illusion I'd been living inside for years. She leaned closer to dust highlighter across my cheekbones, and that's when I felt her breath near my ear, warm and trembling. Her voice was so quiet I almost thought I imagined it, a whisper that slipped between the noise of hairspray and distant violins. She told me my husband had a private suite on the 15th floor, a VIP room reserved under a name that wasn't his, a place where he disappeared during events like this. I froze, my reflection staring back at me with wide, unblinking eyes, my heart suddenly loud in my chest. She didn't look at me directly, just kept working, her hands never faltering, as if she hadn't just dropped a grenade into my lap. I wanted to ask her how she knew, why she was telling me, if she understood what she was doing by saying this out loud. But my throat felt tight, my voice trapped somewhere between disbelief and the creeping fear that she was telling the truth. She finished the last stroke of lipstick, stepped back, and met my eyes in the mirror with an expression I couldn't read. Pity maybe, or warning. And then she was gone, slipping out of the room like smoke, leaving me alone with my perfect face and the terrible weight of what she'd just given me. I sat there for a long time, staring at myself, trying to recognize the woman looking back. My skin glowed under the lights, my hair fell in soft waves over my shoulders, my lips were the color of crushed roses. I looked like someone who had everything. But inside, I felt like I was crumbling, like the foundation she'd applied so carefully was the only thing holding me together. I thought about my husband downstairs, charming donors and shaking hands. His smile bright and practiced, the same smile he gave me every morning over coffee. I thought about the nights he came home late, smelling like bourbon and expensive cologne, the way he kissed my forehead and told me he loved me without ever really looking at me. I thought about the whispers I'd ignored, the glances exchanged at parties, the way other women sometimes watched me with something that felt like sympathy. I had trained myself not to see, not to question, because questioning meant facing something I wasn't ready to face. But now, sitting in this golden room with my perfect face and my breaking heart, I couldn't unsee it anymore. The truth was waiting for me upstairs, behind a door I'd never opened, in a suite I didn't even know existed. And I had to decide whether I was brave enough to walk through it. I stood slowly, smoothing down the silk of my gown, a deep emerald green that my husband had chosen because it photographed well. My hands were shaking, so I pressed them against my stomach, trying to steady my breath, trying to think clearly through the fog of shock and adrenaline. The gala was in full swing now. I could hear the applause, the clinking of champagne glasses, the sound of my husband's voice over the microphone, confident and commanding. He was probably looking for me, wondering where I was, expecting me to appear at his side like I always did, the dutiful wife with the rehearsed smile. But instead I was standing here, staring at the door, knowing that once I walked out of this room, everything would change. I could go downstairs, pretend I never heard what the makeup artist said, slip back into the role I'd been playing for so long. Or I could go upstairs to the 15th floor, to the VIP suite with a secret name, and face whatever was waiting for me there. My chest felt tight, my pulse racing, every instinct screaming at me to run, to hide, to protect myself from the truth. But somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear and the doubt, I felt something else, a quiet, burning need to know. And that need was stronger than everything else. I stepped into the hallway, and the world seemed too bright, too loud, the chandeliers overhead casting sharp shadows across the marble floor. A server passed by with a tray of champagne, offering me a glass with a polite smile, but I shook my head, unable to speak, my throat still locked tight. I moved toward the elevator, my heels clicking against the floor with each step, the sound echoing in my ears like a countdown. Other guests drifted past me, wrapped in furs and diamonds, their laughter ringing out like bells, oblivious to the storm building inside me. I wondered if any of them knew, if they'd seen my husband slip away to that secret suite, if they'd watched me play the perfect wife while he lived a double life. The thought made my stomach twist, humiliation burning hot in my chest, but I kept walking, kept moving forward, because stopping would mean giving in to the fear. I reached the elevator and pressed the button, watching the golden doors slide open, revealing the mirrored interior that reflected a woman I barely recognized. I stepped inside, alone, and pressed the button for the 15th floor. The doors closed, and I felt the floor drop beneath me, my heart dropping with it, as I rose higher and higher, closer to the truth I'd been running from for so long. The elevator climbed in silence, the only sound my own breathing, shallow and uneven, filling the small space. I watched the numbers light up one by one, 10, 11, 12, each floor bringing me closer to something I couldn't take back. My mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last, images flashing through my head that I couldn't control. Was it another woman? A mistress he'd been hiding, someone younger, someone who didn't ask questions or demand his time? Was it something darker, something illegal, something that could destroy everything we'd built together? Or was it nothing at all, just a misunderstanding, a room he kept for business meetings or late-night phone calls, something innocent that I was twisting into betrayal because of my own insecurities? But even as I tried to convince myself, I knew the makeup artist wouldn't have risked telling me if it were nothing. She'd seen something, heard something, and she'd looked at me with that expression. Half pity, half urgency. Like she was trying to save me from something I didn't even know I needed saving from. The elevator slowed, the number 15 glowing bright, and I felt my whole body tense, every muscle coiled tight, ready to run or fight or shatter completely. The doors opened onto a quiet hallway, dimly lit and carpeted in deep burgundy, the air thick with the scent of lilies and expensive wood polish. It was eerily silent up here, so different from the chaos of the gala below, like I'd stepped into another world entirely. I walked slowly, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, my hands clenched into fists at my sides to stop them from shaking. There were only 3 doors on this floor, each one closed, each one holding secrets I wasn't supposed to know. I didn't know which one was his, but somehow, I knew I'd recognize it when I saw it. I moved down the hallway, my heels muffled against the thick carpet, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. And then I saw it. A door at the end of the hall, slightly ajar, a sliver of golden light spilling out into the darkness. My stomach dropped, my legs suddenly weak, and I had to press my hand against the wall to steady myself. I wanted to turn around, to run back to the elevator, to pretend I'd never come up here at all. But my feet kept moving forward, one step at a time, drawn toward that door like it was pulling me in, like I had no choice but to see what was on the other side. I stopped just outside the door, my hand hovering over the brass handle, my whole body trembling with a fear so deep it felt like drowning. I could hear voices inside, low and muffled, a man's voice that sounded like my husband's, and something else. Laughter, soft and intimate, the kind of laughter I used to share with him before we became strangers living in the same house. My chest ached, my eyes burning with tears I refused to let fall, because crying would mean admitting that this was real, that the life I thought I had was built on lies. I thought about all the years we'd spent together, the promises we'd made, the future we'd planned, and I wondered when it had all started to unravel, when he'd stopped seeing me as a partner and started seeing me as a prop. I thought about the woman I used to be before I married him, the woman who had dreams and fire and a voice that didn't need permission to speak. And I realized that somewhere along the way, I'd traded that woman for this one, the one standing outside her husband's secret room, terrified of what she might find, paralyzed by the fear of losing something that might have already been lost. But I couldn't stay frozen forever. I took a deep breath, steadied my hand, and pushed the door open. The door swung open slowly, and the first thing I saw was golden light, soft and warm, spilling across expensive furniture and silk curtains that framed floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering city below. The suite was beautiful, achingly beautiful, the kind of place where secrets were kept and promises were broken. My husband stood near the window, his back to me, his jacket discarded over a chair, his shirt sleeves rolled up in that casual way that used to make my heart skip. For a moment, he didn't notice me, didn't hear the door open, and I stood frozen in the doorway, watching him like a stranger, trying to reconcile the man I thought I knew with the man standing in this hidden room. The air smelled like his cologne mixed with something else. Vanilla, maybe, or jasmine. Something unfamiliar and foreign that didn't belong to me. My eyes scanned the room, searching for evidence, for proof, for the thing the makeup artist had tried to warn me about. And then I saw her. A woman sitting on the velvet sofa, her legs tucked beneath her, a glass of wine in her hand, her face soft and unguarded in a way that made my stomach turn. She wasn't what I expected. She wasn't young or glamorous or dripping in diamonds. She was ordinary, plain even, dressed in simple clothes, her hair pulled back in a loose bun. And somehow that made it worse. My husband turned then, his eyes meeting mine across the room, and I watched the color drain from his face, watched the practiced charm crumble into something raw and panicked. He said my name. Not a question, not an explanation, just my name, hanging in the air between us like a confession. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. My body locked in place by the shock of seeing them together, of finally knowing that everything I'd feared was true. The woman on the sofa looked at me too, her eyes wide and startled, her wine glass frozen halfway to her lips, and I saw guilt there, sharp and immediate, the kind of guilt that confirmed she knew exactly who I was. The silence stretched out, thick and suffocating, filled with all the words none of us wanted to say. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, to throw something and watch it shatter against the wall, but instead I just stood there, my hands trembling at my sides, my heart breaking so loudly I was sure they could hear it. This was real. This was happening. And there was no going back to the person I was 5 minutes ago, before I opened this door. He took a step toward me, his hands raised like he was approaching something fragile and dangerous, his voice low and pleading in a way I'd never heard before. He tried to explain, tried to tell me it wasn't what it looked like, but the words blurred together, meaningless noise that couldn't undo what I was seeing. I watched his mouth move, watched the desperation in his eyes, and I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a cold, hollow emptiness spreading through my chest like ice. The woman stood up, setting her wine glass down with a soft clink, and I noticed the way she glanced at my husband, the way she waited for him to tell her what to do, and I realized this wasn't new. This wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. This was something they'd done before, something they'd built together in the shadows while I smiled for cameras and played my part downstairs. I thought about all the nights he'd come home late, all the business trips and private meetings, all the times he'd kissed me goodnight with lies still fresh on his lips. And I felt something crack inside me, something that had been holding me together for years, finally giving way under the weight of the truth. I forced myself to look at the woman, really look at her, and I saw something in her face that made my breath catch. She looked sad, not triumphant, not smug, just sad, like she was trapped in this moment as much as I was. She opened her mouth as if to speak, but I held up my hand, stopping her, because I didn't want her apology or her excuses or whatever justification she'd prepared. I didn't want anything from her except her absence. My husband started talking again, his voice rising with urgency, trying to fill the silence with explanations about stress and loneliness and how it didn't mean anything, how I was the one he loved, how this was just a mistake he'd been trying to end. But I heard the lie in every word, heard the panic of a man who'd been caught and was scrambling to save himself. I thought about the life we'd built together, the house with the perfect garden, the charity galas and dinner parties, the carefully curated photos on social media that made everyone believe we were happy. And I realized it was all performance, all pretense, a beautiful cage I'd locked myself inside because I was too afraid to admit I'd married a stranger. The woman moved toward the door, her head down, her shoulders hunched like she was trying to make herself smaller, invisible. She passed within inches of me, and I caught the scent of her perfume, soft and sweet, the kind of scent that clings to clothes and pillowcases, and I wondered how many times my husband had come home carrying that smell, how many times I'd noticed it and convinced myself I was imagining things. She didn't look at me as she left, just slipped out into the hallway like a ghost, and then it was just the two of us, standing in this golden room with all our secrets laid bare. My husband reached for me, his hand outstretched. His face twisted with something that might have been regret or might have been fear of losing his perfect life. But I stepped back, putting distance between us because his touch felt like poison now, something that would burn if I let it get too close. I looked at him, really looked at him, and I didn't recognize the man standing in front of me. Or maybe I'd never really known him at all. He kept talking, kept trying to pull me back in with words that used to work, promises of change and counseling and starting over, but I barely heard him. My mind was spinning, replaying every moment of our marriage through this new lens, seeing all the signs I'd missed or ignored, all the red flags I'd painted green because I wanted so badly to believe in us. I thought about the life I'd given up to be his wife, the career I'd walked away from, the friends I'd lost touch with, the parts of myself I'd sacrificed to fit into the shape he needed me to be. And I felt a wave of grief so powerful it almost knocked me over, grief for the woman I used to be, for the years I'd wasted, for the trust I'd given to someone who'd never deserved it. The city sparkled outside the windows, thousands of lights twinkling in the darkness, and I wondered how many other women were standing in rooms like this, discovering truths they'd always suspected but never wanted to confirm. I wondered how many other perfect marriages were rotting from the inside out, hidden behind expensive smiles and designer clothes. I turned away from him, my eyes landing on a small table near the sofa where I saw evidence of their time together. 2 wine glasses, a half-eaten plate of cheese and fruit, a woman's scarf draped carelessly over a chair. Each item was a knife in my chest, proof that this wasn't just about sex or attraction, but intimacy, the kind of quiet, domestic intimacy I thought we shared. He'd built a whole other life up here, a secret world where he could be someone else, someone free from the responsibilities and expectations that came with being married to me. And the worst part was, I understood why he'd done it. We'd become strangers years ago, going through the motions, performing our roles without ever really connecting. But instead of fighting for us, instead of being honest about his unhappiness, he'd chosen this. The lies, the deception, the cowardice of living a double life. I felt anger rising in me then, hot and bright, burning away the numbness, and I turned back to face him with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I told him I was done, not with tears or drama, just a simple quiet statement of fact that seemed to echo in the silence of the room. He tried to argue, tried to convince me to stay and talk it through, but I was already moving toward the door, already leaving this version of my life behind. He called after me, his voice breaking with desperation, but I didn't turn around, didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me fall apart. I walked out of that suite with my head held high, my spine straight, my heart shattered but my dignity intact. The hallway was still empty, still silent, and I made my way to the elevator, my legs somehow carrying me even though I felt like I was floating, disconnected from my body. I pressed the button and waited, staring at my reflection in the polished metal doors. My makeup still perfect, my hair still in place, my dress still pristine. I looked like someone who had everything. But the woman looking back at me knew better. She knew that everything she thought was real had just crumbled to dust. And she knew that the hardest part was still ahead. Walking back into that ballroom, facing the cameras and the questions, and deciding who she wanted to be on the other side of this night. I stepped out of the elevator into the chaos of the gala, and it felt like walking into a dream. The music, the laughter, the sparkle of champagne glasses catching the light. Everything looked the same as when I'd left, but I wasn't the same, and the disconnect between the world around me and the storm inside me was dizzying. People smiled at me as I passed, complimenting my dress, asking where I'd been, telling me my husband had been looking for me. I nodded and smiled back, the performance coming so naturally it scared me, like I'd been training for this moment my whole life. But inside I was screaming, breaking, falling apart in slow motion while everyone around me danced and drank and celebrated. I made my way through the crowd, searching for an exit, a quiet corner, anywhere I could breathe without feeling like I was suffocating under the weight of all these watching eyes. And then I saw the makeup artist standing near the powder room, her eyes finding mine across the crowded ballroom with an expression that told me she'd been waiting, watching, hoping I'd made it back in one piece. She didn't say anything when I approached, just gestured toward the powder room with a slight nod, and I followed her inside, grateful for the sudden quiet, the door shutting out the noise and leaving us in the soft glow of vanity lights. I stood at the sink, gripping the marble countertop so hard my knuckles turned white, staring at my reflection and trying to remember how to breathe. She stood beside me, not touching, not speaking, just present in a way that felt like an anchor in the storm. Finally, she asked if I was okay, her voice gentle and careful, and I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of the question because nothing about this was okay, nothing would ever be okay again. But instead I just shook my head, the tears I'd been holding back finally spilling over, running hot down my cheeks and ruining the perfect makeup she'd spent so long applying. She handed me a tissue without a word, and I pressed it to my face, trying to hold myself together, trying to figure out what came next. She told me she was sorry, that she'd debated whether to tell me, that she'd almost kept it to herself but couldn't live with the guilt of knowing and saying nothing. I asked her how she knew, and she explained that she'd been hired to work private events at the hotel for years, that she'd seen my husband and that woman together more times than she could count, always in that same suite, always during events where I was supposed to be downstairs playing the perfect wife. She said she'd watched me on social media, seen the photos of our life, and felt sick knowing what she knew, knowing that I was living a lie while the world applauded our marriage. I felt humiliation wash over me then, hot and sharp, the knowledge that strangers had known the truth about my husband before I did, that I'd been the last to see what was right in front of me. But I also felt grateful that she'd cared enough to risk telling me, to give me the choice to know, even when it would have been easier to stay silent. I cleaned my face, reapplied my lipstick with shaking hands, and stared at my reflection one more time, trying to decide who I wanted to be when I walked back out there. I could leave quietly, slip out a side door and disappear into the night, let my husband explain my absence however he wanted. Or I could walk back into that ballroom, stand by his side for the cameras one last time, and then leave on my own terms when the spotlight wasn't watching. The makeup artist watched me in the mirror, and I saw understanding in her eyes, like she knew exactly what I was weighing, exactly how heavy this decision felt. She told me that whatever I chose, I deserved better than the life I'd been living, better than a man who could lie to my face and sleep soundly at night. And hearing someone say it out loud, that I deserved better, cracked something open inside me that I didn't even know was closed. I decided to leave. Not through the front door where photographers waited, not through the lobby where donors and politicians would ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. I left through the service entrance, walking past surprised kitchen staff and curious valets, stepping out into the cold New York night in my emerald gown and expensive heels, feeling more free than I had in years. The city hummed around me, cars honking, people shouting, music drifting from open windows, and I let the noise wash over me, let it drown out the sound of my husband's voice still echoing in my head. I walked for blocks, not caring where I was going, just needing to move, to put distance between myself and that hotel, that life, that version of me who'd been too afraid to ask questions. My feet ached in my heels, my dress dragged against the dirty sidewalk, and I probably looked insane wandering through Manhattan alone in formal wear at midnight. But I didn't care. For the first time in years I felt alive. I eventually found myself at a quiet park bench overlooking the East River, the water dark and glittering under the city lights, the Queensboro Bridge lit up like a string of diamonds against the night sky. I sat down, pulling my coat tighter against the cold, and let myself feel everything I'd been holding back. The grief, the anger, the betrayal, the relief. Because underneath all the pain, there was relief. The bone-deep knowledge that I didn't have to pretend anymore. Didn't have to smile through another dinner party or pose for another photo or lie awake wondering why my husband felt like a stranger. I thought about the woman in the suite, and I realized I didn't hate her. She was just another person caught in the wreckage of my husband's choices. Another secret he'd kept locked away. What I felt instead was pity. For her, for him, for the years we'd all wasted trying to be something we weren't. I pulled out my phone and saw 17 missed calls from my husband, 3 from his assistant, messages asking where I was, if I was okay, telling me we needed to talk. I turned the phone off and slipped it back into my purse. We didn't need to talk. Everything that needed to be said had already been said in that silent moment when our eyes met across the room, and we both knew it was over. The city kept moving around me, indifferent to my pain, to my transformation, to the life I was shedding like old skin. I watched people pass by. Couples holding hands, friends laughing, someone walking their dog. And I felt a strange sense of connection to all of them, to everyone who'd ever had their heart broken and had to figure out how to keep living anyway. I thought about what came next. The divorce lawyers, the division of assets, the public scandal when word got out that the golden couple was falling apart. I thought about facing my family, my friends, the questions and the pity and the attendants from people who'd never trusted him. It all felt overwhelming, impossible, like climbing a mountain I didn't have the strength to climb. But sitting there on that bench, watching the water flow endlessly toward the ocean, I realized that I didn't need to figure it all out tonight. All I needed to do was take the next step, and then the next one, and trust that eventually, those steps would lead me somewhere better. I stayed there until the sky started to lighten, the sun rising over the city in shades of pink and gold, painting everything in soft, hopeful light. I thought about the makeup artist who'd whispered the truth in my ear, about the courage it took to tell a stranger something that would shatter her world. I thought about all the women who'd come before me, who'd faced their own versions of this moment and had to choose between comfortable lies and painful truths. And I thought about the woman I wanted to become, not the perfect wife with a rehearsed smile, but someone real, someone messy and broken and brave enough to start over. As the city woke up around me, I stood and smoothed my wrinkled dress, my makeup long gone, my hair wild from the wind, looking nothing like the polished woman who'd walked into the Plaza Hotel the night before. And I realized that was exactly who I needed to be. Sometimes the truth doesn't set you free. It breaks you wide open and forces you to rebuild yourself from the pieces. Sometimes peace means choosing yourself over everything you thought you wanted. Sometimes the makeup comes off, and what's underneath is stronger than anything you could have painted on.